and welcome to the first episode of Warblocks. We are documenting the rivalry between pillager and villager. I'm going to show you battles, I'm going to recreate them, I'm going to show you lots of information. But today is the infamous day of 1066. These two men, Duke Wilhelm of Northman and the newly appointed King Hal of Witherland, are battling for a promise made by a dead king. The day is 1066. This is the Battle of Witherland, to decide the fate of an entire country. These two men were both promised the throne. Hal was promised it on the deathbed of his trusted friend, who he loyally served as an advisor and a governor. The deceased king, McFriars, on his deathbed. But the Duke of Northman, and under his culture of the Northman culture, what matters is what was promised during life. During McFriar's youth, as he was a prince in his early 20s, he lived in Northman, the Duchy of Northman. He lost a bet to Wilhelm, and the price was his kingdom, his future kingdom, and the future of his kingdom. The price of the loss was that Wilhelm was to become king after he died. Now you know the two men that are going to be battling it out. Let's look at their two families. This, to my left, is the crest of the noble house of Northman that rules the Duchy of Northman in northern Francia. And to my right is the noble house that rules Witherland, the Saxonians. These two houses were battling for one prize: the crown of Witherland. Welcome back to Warblocks, everyone. In this chapter we will be looking at the people promised the throne of Witherland after King McFriar's death, leading up to the Battle of Witherland, as shown today later on. These two men were the main heirs. Hal was the Duke of Cambridgeshire, and as I've mentioned before, was promised the crown of Witherland on the deathbed of the deceased King McFriars. Hal had governed Witherland for many years while McFriars was doing piggy and religious pursuits. and he was a close friend and advisor of McFriar's while he was governing the country. On the other hand, we have the Northman, Duke Wilhelm, who was friends during the late king's early adulthood, his 20s, while he was a prince and was living in Francia. They became friends and was promised it to the crown due to losing a bet to Wilhelm. Now, in Northman culture, it's what you've said in your general life that matters, as opposed to in Witherland culture, which what matters is your last request. Therefore, the King's Council, the person that appoints the new king, chose Hal as the most suitable ruler over Wilhelm and two of the other men in the race. One was a piglin, who was promised the throne by the former piglin kings of Witherland before it was taken off by McFriar's father, before it was recaptured and made under Saxonian rule. There was also the late king's young cousin, who was merely 7 days old, and was therefore not fit enough to lead. With King Hal was seen as the most competent, most wise, and most supported leader to be chosen by the King's Council. So let's look at the two houses in this battle. Here we have on the left of me, we have the House of Northmen, run by and led by Wilhelm. The Northmans were originally descended from a common ancestor of the Piglins, and who with the Piglins, and they led with the Piglins raids on the coast of what is now the Duchy of Norman in Francia, and after a siege of a small town in current Northman, a treaty was signed that the Northman family would run that duchy, which is one of the most powerful duchies in the Francia kingdom. Now, on the other side of this is the Saxonians, who have been ruling on and off with the pillages for the last 500-600 years. Currently, the head of that Saxonian family was the King Hal of Witherland, who was the brother-in-law of the late King McFriar's. Hal is now the head of the Saxon family. Now, given the Piglin defeats up in the north of Witherland, the only two contenders for the throne now are Wilhelm and the current King Hal. Now, the Northmans, being related to the Piglins, use classic Piglin longships with a slightly different design, a slightly broader bow. Now, they have sailed up to the coast, up just slightly north from their land to the coast of Sussex. And both people have met near Cadurbic Hill. In red here are the river forces, and blue are the pillages. The blue and white are the pillagers' allies, such as the Franconians and some piglin groups. Now, as soon as King Hal had news of the invasion by the Northmen and the pillagers, he raced down south from where they were resting. He and his forces were resting after the battle with piglins. He gained about 600,000 new troops, although most of them didn't have any battlefield training. The Withers had a light advantage as they were on a hill and had the high ground. The Wither forces here at the top use a classic formation where they use shield to shield, doing a strong defensive wall with a line of archers and longbow men behind them. Now the pillager forces had a similar defensive strategy, although they were on the offensive and they going up the hill. The pillagers were more exposed, so they had to be. So Duke Wilhelm had to be clever. His foot soldiers attacked, and cavalry attacked and faced heavy losses. Then Wilhelm devised a plan with his advisors at the bottom of the battlefield, far away from the action, that suggested that they fake a retreat or feign a retreat as used historically in battles. Therefore they swung round, retreated the opposite direction from the arrows here. They went back. There was wooded on both sides. They looked like they were panicking, running away as they were ordered to. Then that tripped the Wither forces led by King Hal to come down the hill. Then the cavalry quickly took round and encircled the Wither forces. This led them a very disadvantaged position, but the Wither forces fought. At this point in the battle, there was a rumour that Duke Wilhelm had been killed, although later he took his helmet off, branded it in the air and said he was alive. This pushed on the pillager forces even more, who trapped the Wither and later killed King Hal of Witherland. Now at this point, of course, there were no cannons, there was no gunpowder, there was just swords, bows and longbows and axes. Now the Northmen soldiers had mail armour, which is much lighter. Most of the Northmen were professional soldiers who had strong, sturdy helmets and better armour. They also used long axes and swords and bows, in contrast to the Witherlands, who were mostly very low trained, quickly trained soldiers, brought up from peasants, farmers, often having basic swords and some shields, not often having much body armour on. Some trained soldiers that have helmets, and then behind them there was the lines of archers and longbowmen. At this point in the battle, later on in the battle, King Hal was in the fortress at Caddock Hill, but came out to rally his soldiers who were struggling. This was when King Hal was shot in the eye socket by a Northman archer. Next week on Warblocks, we're looking at the famous naval battle, the Battle of Sluys. It's the 13th century, Witherland has been renamed, and we are on the high seas. See you then.